How will foreign policy look like under the second Trump administration? We take a closer look at what Trump brings to the situations in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and with China. Joining us now is David Wormser, foreign policy specialist and Middle East affairs analyst at the Center for Security Policy. David, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. To begin, Trump promised in his speech to stop all wars. What changes do you see a Trump return to the White House bringing to the wars in the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and the tensions in Asia?
Yeah, he promised all wars end, and I think that's derivative of his first term where he thought that American power was credible. People understood America was a dangerous country if you attack us or you attack our allies. And that formed a certain credible deterrence, as opposed to the current administration where you have the famous don't, where we keep telling nations don't dare. They dare and then we do nothing, and so they do it again. So I think that's one of the biggest changes, and I think President-elect Trump, or former President Trump, or however one wants to say, will try to restore that sense of deterrence and using his personal credibility from the first term to convince other nations you have got to stop threatening our allies and got to stop threatening the United States, and that should bring a certain calmness and start ending some of these wars.
And speaking of that, when it comes to Iran, what can we expect? Will Iran do something in the 2 months before Trump gets sworn in, especially given the reports on Iran interfering with this election to try to avoid that second Trump term?
Yeah, this is the $1,000 question. Iran right now is really terrified of President Trump. They've tried to kill him. They've tried to kill several of the people who are going to be involved in this new administration, including what we hear is Brian Hook is heading the transition team for state. So he was one of those 3 or 4 that the Iranians have tried to kill. So this does not endear Iran to these incoming officials, including the president. So the Iranians know this and are quite scared, but they don't know quite how to react, because on one side, if they don't, Israel has really strategically inverted the circumstance on them, and they are now feeling the weight of Israeli power coming down on them, and that's humiliating and can threaten their regime. But on the other side, if they respond to Israel, the Israelis can strike back, and they can bring even worse on them. And now the Israelis have the tailwind of the incoming administration in anticipation in 2 months, which means the Iranians know whatever Israel does to them now, there's not a lot that can be done by reaching out to America to reverse it in 2 or 3 months. So they're quite scared, and they don't quite know what to do. My bet is they will do something, simply because if they do nothing, their impotence is really revealed, and for a regime like that, that's fatal.
And David, to your earlier point about credibility, we saw Iran's currency plunge to an all-time low Wednesday, as well as Chinese stocks taking a hit with the news of Trump winning. Is this an end to that perceived U.S. weakness on the international stage, especially after the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Yeah, I believe it's the beginning of the end. I mean, people will probe us, and they will see. While I know President Trump would like to sort of extend deterrence globally and shut things down, I would expect some nations to probe that to make sure that that's really the case, or whether some of the more isolationist part of the Republican camp that wants no more wars would pull the president back. So I expect some probing, and that will be a little bit of instability at the beginning. But I do think that that sort of a deterrence globally will be restored, and that President Trump has this image of being tough, but not only tough, but not predictable. And people who want to probe America, people who challenge America, unpredictability is almost as frightening as power itself.
Zooming in on that, in terms of China, Xi Jinping has congratulated Trump and called for peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation. Now, several China analysts say that Beijing is watching the U.S. very closely now because Trump is unpredictable. How do you view that in terms of deterrence?
Well, I think the Chinese, if they were thinking of doing anything in Taiwan or elsewhere in the near future, would be quite cautious. Again, they may probe, but they'll probe on the margins. You saw them recently doing a lot of aggressive activity against the Philippines, as well as some against Vietnam. You could expect some of that to continue to see how America will react. But an overt, brazen challenge like invading Taiwan, I think they'll defer. The Chinese themselves, if I read their military buildup correctly, really only put 2027 or onwards as the correct date for when they feel that they will have enough ships and be ready to challenge us. But they may defer that a little bit if the United States begins to also rebuild its defense.
David Wormser, foreign policy specialist and Middle East affairs analyst at the Center for Security Policy. Thank you so much for joining us.